Welcome, everybody. Really excited to be here with Abdul to share his success story. Welcome, Abdul, and everyone for coming here to watch live and also later. I think you're going to really learn a ton from Abdul's success story. He's going to be super inspiring, tons of insights and lessons learned. And before we jump in, first off, I'm Ben Resnick. I'm a TTP live teach instructor and full-time GMAT specialist since 2016. And we'd want this to be as engaging as possible. So please drop in the chat any questions you have. Also really curious, where is everyone coming from here? Where are you guys in your GMAT journey? And what things, is there anything that you really want to, any burning questions you have, we'd love to hear. Then of course, as always, please like and comment. And one question for you that we'd love to hear at the end in the comments is, what was your number one takeaway today? That will really help you process what you learned. And I've started doing this more and more, and every meeting I have is like, what's my number one takeaway? And thinking about that and having that intention to write it afterwards. I noticed with that writing intention, it helps a lot processing things. And we're always talking about how can we learn faster, and that's a big one. Same concept in the course is like, we want you to apply the lesson, not just read it, right? So drop in the chat. And but let's start off, kick things off with Abdul. Tell us a bit about your background. Amazing story, 360 to 710. So congratulations.
Thank you, Ben. Hi, everybody. My name is Abdul. I work actually in higher education. I've been working in higher education over the past 5 years at a university in Toronto. If anyone is from Canada, maybe drop in the chat, but York University. And I help support the student leadership development programs. And essentially I manage various student leadership programs, such as an Agents of Change program, which is essentially a student community initiative, or which supports the development of student community initiatives that address some of the social determinants of health and UN SDGs, or United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we do a lot of great work in the community, support development of projects such as the Black Students Mentorship Program, which supports BIPOC students through mentorship opportunities. Other initiatives such as Toronto Tooth, which provides oral hygiene products to the homeless, and Empowering Women Health, which addresses the lack of women in healthcare leadership, amongst other projects. I've also supported currently projects such as mentorship, tutoring, class representative programs. All these are great leadership programs that allow students to develop their skills. So that's a bit about me. Just as a background of my undergrad, I studied psychology, right? Did a couple years of psychology, was involved in various research labs, etc. And really, I think after I graduated, initially I wanted to go into clinical psychology, and then I realized, psych wasn't for me. I didn't know if I could handle the research day to day, and I always had in the back of my mind, I was interested in consulting and the whole business side of things. So that's kind of what led me to the GMAT and TTP and overall. But I know there's a lot more questions ahead, so I'll pass it back to Ben and we'll continue.
All right, great. Yeah. And so what motivated you to go on the GMAT journey? And there was a question there, how long it took you to prepare. So maybe if you just have a summary, maybe a summary of the journey, and then we'll double click on start to finish and dive into all the details of challenges, ups and downs and everything. Yeah.
I think for that first question, how long did it prepare? So that's a very interesting question. I actually started in July. Well, technically it was August of 2021. And then I studied for a couple months, and then I got sick. I got pretty sick pretty badly. So I was off for a couple months. So really, I would say less than 2 years. If I don't count the periods I was off, probably a year and 8 months, perhaps, along the lines of that. What's interesting is initially when I first started, I thought, I could do it in 2 months max, 3 months max. But then I realized the turtle versus the hare story, and I was the turtle going consistently throughout. But definitely something valuable, and I think it taught me a lot and helped me grow in many ways that in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's a consistent theme we've seen from a lot of these success stories. There are the ones that go really hard for a shorter period of time, and it depends on your starting point and everything. But we also see these really amazing stories where finding what works for you, and especially if you have a large score increase you need, like having that approach of the patience involved and the persistence and giving yourself time. really it can be a huge factor. We had Jacob 2 weeks ago was talking about not having that too much pressure on yourself. Well, I have to get it this month. That's where I see people tense up, and then they actually will downslide more, because if it's like, oh, I have to get 200 points this month, it's like it's too much pressure and it's just not realistic. And like having that big ambition is great, but you do have to like put in the work, right? It's like, if I want to dunk a basketball, like not this week, right? Take a year to train or something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 5'10" and
Yeah.
not athletic, so.
I
So,
think
but,
giving
I
up
mean,
on the time piece is absolutely essential. Like you always have to let go if you're truly committed. At least for me, like I had to get over that kind of mindset where it's like, oh, I need to do an X amount of time because I need to do my MBA by 28, and then I can have an X job by X date. I think just
right.
accepting the timeline and letting go of that and focusing more on my own performance, like it kind of just helped relax things, and I wasn't like so stressed and anxious, because I know that's a lot of worries for a lot of people.
For sure, for sure. So let's double click on that. So there were some questions here about experiencing moments when you wanted to give up, what kept
Yeah.
you going. Maybe talk a little bit more about your mission, purpose, and motivation. And a similar question there was like, share your strategy to make yourself as consistent as possible. And maybe if there were ups and downs, what you did to like bounce back, and how other people can apply that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I see a couple comments. I think absolutely. For me personally, when I started, I think in August of 2021, I was working crazy hours, because usually for August in higher education is the busiest time of the year. We're working 12 hours sometimes, or more, 12 to 14 hours a day. And then I'm also commuting. So I live far from work. So I'm commuting 2 hours, 2.5 hours a day. So I have very little time to study. And I think with that time and over time, if you continue trying to stay committed, like you can burn out pretty quickly, and that's something that happened to me quite a bit. And perhaps that's what the question that Daisy had about when you wanted to give up. I think what ended up happening in that November, late November of 2021, I got randomly. I remember I was walking with a friend of mine at work, and I just got super dizzy. I don't know where. I was feeling super nauseous, and I had these symptoms of just like I couldn't focus. I couldn't look at the screen, and it was crazy. I went to the hospital. They're doing MRI and CAT scans. It was a mess. I was effectively bedridden and on liquids for a couple months until February, when I could get back to work and really start working properly. And I think that moment is pretty bad, because I had all these timelines and expectations, like, oh no, I need to write my GMAT by January so I can meet, the round 3, round 4 deadlines. I have to ensure I can get into school the following September. And I think at that moment definitely was something I wanted to give up. But what kept me going was, I just, I was like, no, I have to keep pushing, because I've already invested 3 months in. It's almost like a gambler, right? When you put in some money, you can't get out. You're like, I already put in money and I have to keep going until I win. So I was taking, even though I was taking a lot of L's, I just kept pushing. I'm like, no, put in more time, put in more time. It'll work out. It'll work out. So that's kind of what kept me going through that moment. And then even though like I wasn't seeing friends, I wasn't really dealing with a lot of what's the word? Like I didn't have a lot of that support, just because I was just working crazy hours, and then I was commuting, and then I was getting home. I just kind of pushed through, and I tried to schedule some times of leisure, just because I knew that my schedule was so busy that if I scheduled it, it would just been easier. That way you can relax as well, because a lot of times we schedule our study time, but we don't schedule all the other fun stuff that helps us recover and rest. Yeah. So that helped me.
That's really good. Yeah, I think you said to me earlier that you were striving to, with the leisure, to like make sure you're exercising, keeping up good habits. We hear that a lot. As being an important thing that people, if you want to sacrifice, it's like sacrifice the parties and that kind of thing, right? And you will have to sacrifice them somewhere, but don't sacrifice on your health, your sleep.
Absolutely.
And obviously a really challenging situation, and so great to hear that you pushed through that and recovered and everything.
Can I add a point about the exercise?
That'd be great. Yeah.
You know what? I think that wellness is essential tip. I know it's like, oh, I don't have time for wellness. I don't have time for exercise. Like, it doesn't need to be going to the gym. It can even be just walking outside for like 20 minutes fast.
Right.
Because
Totally.
I felt that like it's almost like an investment, right? You put in money or you put in time and you get more energy back. Like, one thing I lacked was that I just didn't have any energy at all. Like, I was like exhausted, like all that work, mentally exhausted. But I find that exercise, like I remember like it was just light. I didn't go to the gym because I didn't have time to even travel. So I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just do a quick run, 20 minutes, and then 20 minutes lightweight, and it just refreshes your mind. And then the next day, I just slept better, even though like I only slept like 5-6 hours a night. like I just felt overall better. So I highly
Right.
recommend people who are doing studying, like, don't think that you don't have time. Like, I would invest that time and you're studying, your memory is better. I mean, the research says it, right? You retain information better, your mind is clear, you're focused. It's exercise or some sort of physical activity is essential.
So that's a great takeaway for you.
Yeah.
I'll call that one. I think that's fantastic. I'm a huge advocate of that. It can even be small bits of time, like
Mhm.
even in between your study breaks. So when I'm teaching, if we have a 2-hour session, always encourage everyone, get up, exercise even 5 minutes for your break. Or
Mhm.
if you're doing GMAT Focus Edition, those are 45-minute sections. So, but yeah, get up often and move your body in that short walks or even, full workouts, but whatever it is, move your body around throughout the day is great. And then another thing we often hear, in general, is that having an implementation intention is super important. Basically, having a clear plan for what you're going to do when. And, that's part of the reason so many people like the TTP course. I was actually a student myself of it to help me get to my 780. So, maybe talk a bit about the course and if that helped in terms of the structure and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first started, like, they had that dollar trial, which is excellent, because at the moment I tried it, I'm like, this is amazing, because like I'm like, you see everything's broken down for you step by step right from the beginnings, and it tells you exactly what you need to study and when you need to study. So that's something I found very helpful was like, I think right from the beginning is like the math foundations and then basic sentence correction, and then it made sure it built on top of each other. And in terms of a schedule, they technically do provide a schedule for you, right? You know exactly what you need to study, at least in terms of content review, before you can even enter the mock exams, right? That's one thing I really liked about TTP was that they ensured that your fundamentals were like secure, like you 100% understand right to to the details of everything you need to know before you even enter the exam phase. And I thought, you know what, that helped me so much, because like if I just because I remember my first mock, like that's what 360. I had a what was that, a 9 on quant and a verbal 28. And I remember in the beginning, I swear to God, Ben, I did not even know how to multiply and divide. Because for me personally, like I didn't do math since like grade, was it for 2013 or something? Right. So it's been 8, 9 years since I did math, and that's first year university. Even then, it was just like I was not the best studier. Like a lot of times, there's ways, you know what I mean, in terms of getting a good grade by just showing up class, sitting in the front, making them smile, and making the professor like you, right? Doing well on
Yeah,
assignments.
it's different. It's
But
a
then
different
standardized
animal. Yeah,
testing,
yeah.
in Canada, we don't even have standardized testing. Like, I
Oh
mean,
wow,
for
yeah.
high school, there's no SATs. So it's like you don't have any of that experience. And you go in, and then I'm like, uh-oh, reality hits, life hits you hard. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
brutal.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard that story a lot, but a lot of
Yeah.
people give up,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
really amazing that you
Yeah.
were, you didn't let that get to you too much.
Yeah.
If anyone does start low like that, that is pretty common, more common than you might think.
Yeah.
So don't let it discourage you. This is a great testament. There's been a
Yeah.
lot of other success stories with TTP, starting at that 300 or so,
Yeah.
even 200s.
Yeah.
So, know that it's like, you can always improve, right? If
Yeah.
you put in the work, right? And right.
Yeah.
So maybe talk more about some of the pep talks you gave yourself, or anything
Yeah.
in the course else that was
Yeah.
helpful, encouraging you to keep going and like not get discouraged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is I remember when I first started, like I'm like, oh my God, I have a 360. What, like how am I gonna get 700 plus for some of these top schools? And I remember I was like before, like when I was researching TTP, there's a video of Dalal. She was like a
Right.
former
Right.
student as well, who started off super low. I think actually lower than me, like 200 something. And I remember reading her story. I was so inspired. Like she had a
Right.
video, and she's talking about how her father had leukemia, and she also had a 2-year journey, and over time she was she's really really worked hard, but she had the same issue as me, like forgetting how to do basic multiplication division. And I'm like, oh my God, this is someone I can actually relate to, because a lot of the other videos, it's like you have these geniuses like, oh yeah, I studied 2 weeks how to get a 790 in 2 weeks. I'm like, what? My baseline is like at the bottom. We start at the bottom, now here. But it's like
Right.
reading Dalal's story was just fantastic. I think for a lot of people who don't have that strong baseline, I think it's important to find somebody who you can relate to. Like for me,
Totally.
like I couldn't find anyone who was like so below average. Like I wasn't in the average, like I was like way below at the bottom, right? And finding Not that it affects who I am, but I'm just saying in terms of the score. And I think finding someone like that, and even the way
Totally.
she spoke, it was so
Right.
interpersonal, like a human
Right.
being. I was like,
Right.
all these other people are all these like engineering. Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, I got the 790, bro. I'm like, what? I can't relate to you, dude.
That's
But
very
yeah,
funny.
so having like that interpersonal piece, and I think hearing her story, like I was very inspired. So Dalal, if you ever watch this, thank you. Shout out. W's in the chat for Dalal
Yeah,
and
yeah, for
Sandy.
sure, for sure.
But
Yeah, and maybe we could put a link in the chat there.
yeah,
Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah,
Yeah, we recommend that video as well.
yeah,
Dalal,
sure.
amazing story, and yeah, a great point to find someone like you to inspire you. That's a
Yeah,
great point at all.
exactly.
And yeah, that's great. Um, Let's see. So maybe curious about practice tests and at what
Yep,
point were you taking them?
yep,
And like, did you just follow the plan exactly, or did you shift around? We generally recommend following it, but sometimes people want to feel like they need more emphasis on certain things, more review on certain
yep,
things. Definitely encourage more review as necessary. That's hugely important.
yeah.
And yeah, so there's a few things there, but then also curious about your review process because that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to go through the entire the course outline for TTP just because I knew I was not ready in terms of the content, the foundations. My fundamentals were not there, right? Like I was standing there, I couldn't even multiply and divide. I forgot how long divide. I was like, what's going on? And the decimals too, and then now you're throwing in decimals. So I had to
Right.
ensure I went through the entire course, like section by section. I did like 95% of the tests. And then after I was comfortable with the content, then only did I start doing the mock test because I didn't even touch the official questions either because I was like, I don't know if I want to do them unless I know I was completely ready. So I went through the course content, and then afterwards, once I finished, I just finished all the chapter tests and the unit tests, and then I went into the testing phase. And in the testing phase, I did it weekly. I think that's typically what they say. Try to do it once a week over six. Well, I mean, I did 5 of them. I didn't do all 6. I did 5 of them, and after each test, what I would do is, I think what's advised is typically you would take at least 1 to 2 days, review the test, go back the areas of your weekend, do more chapter tests. So it actually went back to TTP and I did more of the, reviewing that certain section I was weak in. And then afterwards do flashcards, very consistently, and then do the next test every weekend. So it was, yeah, I would, at least I would use them sparingly. But what's I think okay is if you have a lot of time in between, at least for me, like for example, I remember at one point in the middle of my study, I just did it because I was like, you know what, just good practice. Like I think a year in, because the thing is with me, it took me 2 years, but what ended up happening was that in September of 2022, I actually ended up writing the test for the first time officially. And the reason why I did that was because I had it scheduled and I kept postponing at that point. But then the work was just so busy and I only gotten through halfway through the course material that I was like, you know what? I have to write this. I don't like, even if I don't do well, I knew I was going to do it well, even though I went through halfway through the content. I went in and I scored a 600. And I remember I was so depressed, like 2 weeks afterwards, like I just go work, go to sleep. Like that's at work, go to sleep. Like I was just my parents, like I felt shame in my face showing to my parents. I'm like, oh my God. Like, but I mean, I kind of knew deep down inside that like, I wasn't fully prepared.
Right.
Um, but I think what's great about it is like if you have enough time, you're probably gonna forget because you do so many questions, you're gonna forget at least the quant side of things. So you can maybe reuse it once or twice, but I'd be very cautious of reusing them and using them as a baseline, especially especially like the third, fourth, fifth, sixth tests. Like I only reuse the first and second test once and twice because sometimes with the passages on reading comp, um, if you remember part of it, or it becomes easier. It's not representative of actual test date scoring, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to highlight a few things you said that I think are
Yeah,
really awesome there.
yeah,
So flashcards are huge.
yeah,
They've been added to the course in the last
yeah,
year, I believe. A whole module there,
yep,
or a whole modules for everything,
yep,
and you also create your own. So you can either create your own digitally, or if you do want to, like just really quickly as you go,
yep,
if you're in a lessons or something, write them down on physical cards, then you can transfer them over.
yep,
But I encourage that really strongly. Spaced repetition and like it's really,
100%.
really huge, because especially there's a lot of material, right? And then people are like, do I have to know all this? Like, yeah,
Yeah, you do.
you do.
I
It's
had,
like,
you know what's
yeah,
funny? I
yeah.
had over 1,000 flashcards, and I didn't even
Right,
like.
right,
One
right.
of the biggest mistakes I made in my prep was not doing flashcards early on. Like it took me a year after that first in that September when I scored like in the 600s, like low 600. I think it was like a 620 or something. I'm like, I need to use flashcards. So I kept buying a bunch on Amazon, and over time I had over 1,000, literally over 1,000.
Right,
And
right,
every day I'd go through them.
right.
You know, after work, if I had break, I'd be going through the flashcards. I like,
That's great.
especially if you don't know the fundamentals, I think it's essential you use flashcards.
That's right. That's right. And if you think about it, 1,000 sounds crazy, but it's not that crazy, because
Yeah,
it's like there's 4,000, 5,000 questions in
yeah,
the course.
hmm,
And, if you can break them down into little bits,
yep,
those little bits add up. So you don't want to have to think. You
yeah,
want to just, the way I think of it is like, if you wanted to be fluent, you want to be fluent in this test like a language. So if you're trying to have a conversation, like, you don't want to be looking at like
yeah,
the dictionary each time, right?
yeah,
Or like
yeah,
racking your brain. Like, that's not fluency. Fluency is
yeah,
like, I don't have to think about it. It's
yep,
automatic. So that's another way of like analogy
yeah,
of thinking about it. And then there were a couple other notes that I just want to highlight. Yeah, don't abuse the test. So taking them later on is good. I
yeah,
do encourage everyone to take that baseline right away. We often do see people be fearful about it. It is okay. You don't have to take it completely blind. You can, get a sense of the question types, how they work first, and that maybe, maybe if you know the questions a little bit better, it's a little bit less overwhelming. So that, and then, maybe you're less discouraged by the score, but a lot of times just accept in advance, the score might be discouraging, right?
yeah,
If you're not super experienced with these tests and things. So don't overreact to that, and don't overreact as you go. It's like, I know when you said the 600, I think Dalal like was incredibly impressive. Like even like when she went from like 250 to 350, she was like
yeah,
celebrating. Like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
if I could do that, but like,
yeah,
it's more common to like
yeah,
your 600 to be like, oh no, I wanted 700, right?
yeah,
But like if you look at the 240, you increased, and you
yeah,
wanted like 350, so you're like 2/3
yeah,
there, right?
yeah,
And it is, I mean, the caveat is we will acknowledge that it can be a bit harder, those final points, but
hmm,
even still, like, celebrate the progress, praise your
yeah,
progress. It can be hard when you have a big goal like that, but
yeah,
just a mantra for everyone, like, praise
yeah,
your progress, like, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Celebrating, I think, the little moments, and like I
exactly,
said
yeah,
earlier, scheduling in the leisure and like celebratory moments. Like what I would do is after every mock, like I
right,
wouldn't review it the same day. Like after finishing, like I would go out with a friend and grab dinner or something and just like really de-stress, like do something wild.
right.
And
That's
then the
great.
next day, okay, my mind is fresh, then go back and review the questions.
Right, that's
Because
great.
otherwise, you know what, your mind, like it plays tricks on you and it's always trying to attack you in some way. So
Exactly.
you have to keep the line, hold the line.
Yeah, hold the line. The mindset stuff can't be overrated.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
On that note, yeah, there was a question here that I really love. I'm gonna maybe ask this in the future. Daisy, thank you. Besides learning these math topics, what else did you gain from this journey? How have you changed from before taking the GMAT to now scoring a 710? And you can maybe talk about whether that's more concrete skills that maybe
Mhm.
apply to real life, but also
Yeah.
psychological things. I think it can be really broad in terms of what we can take away from this.
Yeah. That I think that's a very, very good question, Daisy. I think in terms of just personally developing, I learned so many things. Honestly, it's just like it's amazing. Like even though it took 2 years, I remember when I first started, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get it done 3 months, no problem. Boom, boom, boom. Let's move on. But then I think the first thing I realized is just kind of accepting that things that are out of your hand and just going slow and working meticulously, like that discipline where you have to go every single day. Having X number of hours. Like I honestly, I studied probably like at least 2 hours, almost like 6 days a week for over 2 periods. When I was studying consistently, it was that consistent buildup over time, right? So like that turtle versus the hare story. Like my entire life, I was the hare, right? Boom, get it done. Okay, done. Let's go party, right? Now it's like there's no time to party. I have to go slowly and building that mental toughness, not giving up when it's hard. I remember like one other thing I learned is like when I would make like silly mistakes or even like just completely getting the content. Like I know for example in TTP there's like medium level tests and difficult level tests. For me, I'm a very perfectionist. So I have a problem that if it's not perfect, I stress so much. I'm like, oh my God, I made that one mistake. And then you have the anxiety and spirals where you're, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm going to do terrible. Maybe I should reschedule the test. And then I kept doing that. And then I think over time, like especially toward the end of the last like 4 or 5 months, I'm like, you know what? No, forget it. Focus on that growth mindset piece where it's like, I'm
Yeah,
working to develop my skills. And who cares about the score? You know what? Score be damned. Like, I need to focus on my skills and trying my best. And it doesn't really matter like what the score is. Like, as long as I try my best and I really try to change my mental mindset where it's like, instead of worrying with that score, where it's like that fixed mindset where like, oh, my skills can't grow. It's like, no, I can grow. I can get better. Although it may take longer, right? It was uh, it's just better when you focus on your own, like your own performance, rather than like, hey, as long as I try my best, I'll be okay. I
that
think
makes
that
sense.
was really one of the biggest things I learned. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. That mindset of taking the pressure off,
Yeah.
focusing on the growth, and
Yeah.
then actually seeing the growth. I mean,
Mhm.
even if it is ups and downs in your
Yeah.
score, but seeing the growth and like, oh wait, I didn't
Yeah.
know this concept, now I did. Did you use the analytics much in terms of like
Yep.
one thing we
Absolutely.
talk about is like trying to go for streaks, celebrating those little wins, like you said, streaks,
Yep.
hitting your score target, the targeted accuracy for each topic
Yep.
on the tests, and then not getting down, right? Like you said,
Yep.
if you don't hit it, but then like retaking it.
Yeah.
But maybe any thoughts on that in
Yeah.
terms of reviewing and the hitting accuracy and all that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very good point. I think what's great about TTP, it actually breaks down your analytics in terms of which section you're strongest on and which sections you're weakest on. Like, for example, I remember for me, I think it was computations and combinations and permutations that was the most difficult because I never learned this. Even in high
Right,
school,
right,
I never
right.
learned it. I
That's
think it's
hard.
only
It's
if you
hard.
take a certain course, so it's completely new. I'm like, NC is like what, N choose five. I'm like, what is this? Or NP5. I'm like,
Right,
what
right.
is going on? And all the different variations. But it was very I think like understanding where you're weak at is very helpful. And I think TTP really breaks it down in a very easy way. So when you're reviewing, like, you know what, I'm already good maybe at probability, but I need to focus on, I don't know, number properties, for example. I need to make sure, because there's certain questions I think that are more likely to appear on the test than others. So I
Right.
think that's where you can manage that. And in terms of streaks, absolutely. I think that was very helpful. Like focusing on or kind of accepting that you have to lose the battle to win the war. And that's one great thing. I think that was actually a quote from I don't know if it was Scott. I'm not sure. In one of his videos or in one of the emails he sends on a
Right,
regular
right.
basis, where it's like you have like as a perfectionist for me, it's like, oh, I can't make a single mistake, right? And then you go into standardized testing, it's like, wait, hold on. The whole point is you make a mistake, and you're okay with that. But then you work and try to get as much as you can get right because most people you're not going to get a perfect score. I don't know if everyone's gotten every single question around the GMAT ever, right? It's probably impossible. But then my mindset always was like, hey, everything's perfect, blah blah blah. Oh my god, I got that. I made a couple of mistakes and it would just mess me up. But I think focusing on the streaks and be like, you know what, it's okay because you can still get a high score by getting the easier questions right and the medium questions right, and at least some of the hard questions. And that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
yeah. So it's
That's
not
that's
impossible.
actually that actually is a big
Yeah,
unlock. Great
yeah,
point about that. And there was an experiment that someone posted
yeah.
where it was like getting 1 out of the 12. This was with the practice test, the official
Mhm.
practice test.
Yeah,
1 out of 12 of the ones rated hard on GMAT Club
yeah,
appeared on a test,
yeah,
and that scored a 49, like what you ended up with.
yeah,
1 out of 12
exactly.
correct,
Yeah,
but got all of the easy and medium correct.
yep.
Now, I mean, there were some harder mediums, but even
Mhm.
still, like on all
Yep,
the hard mediums, and then like not, 1 out of, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And also,
yeah,
we've seen on ESRs, the enhanced
yep,
score reports,
yep,
people missing, scoring around 70% correct and
yeah,
scoring 49. Now,
yeah,
those 50s, those 50-51s are a little bit stricter, but I mean, 49 is obviously an awesome score. And
yeah,
you combine that with a good verbal score, you're
yeah,
well into the 700s. So,
yeah.
yeah, so that's keeping that in mind, that this test is testing your decision making
Mhm.
and not getting too tied into the perfection, and you got to let questions go. But I'm curious about that, your time management. Was that a challenge? It's often a really big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? On the test itself, that was a huge problem. Like I remember when I was doing my mocks, especially the first couple, like I was spending like on the harder questions, I was spending like 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and for multiple questions, right? And I was like, hold on a second. And towards the end, I'm literally rushing. Like the last 10 questions, I'm like a minute or less, and I'm like, oh my god. Like that was something I really had to work on, was just the timing piece. And what I would do instead is like anytime I did the official guide or the TTP ones, I'd make sure I'd even set like even the medium and harder ones like less than 2 minutes, and I'd train myself to try to get it done within that time and then just keep moving forward, and like not worrying about the I think getting it wrong, right? I think that was a huge issue for me, was that I was like, oh, I need to make sure I get this right, because what if this affects my score? But then it's like you have to sometimes lose that battle and be like, you know what, make that estimated guess, be like, it seems like it's like C, you know what, just go with it. I need to ensure I have enough time for the other questions, because the thing with like what you were saying, Ben, earlier, was that you can, like, for example, if you're just given a bunch of hard questions throughout, even if you get a couple of them right and get a bunch of them wrong, your score could be higher than someone who's got like a majority of the easy and medium questions right, but then, maybe, messed up a couple on the easier questions. So
Right.
it's a very, like, as an
Exactly.
adaptive test, it's very
Right.
unique.
Right.
Um, but I think that's where it's also beautiful, right? Because if you get a bunch of easy and medium questions right, you can get a very good score. But you can, like, for example, like, let's say there's what, 31, 32 questions, right, in quant. Sometimes if you get like, 29 out of 31, your score might be lower than somebody who has got 16 out of 31 questions, just based on the
Right.
difficulty, right? So
Right.
it's
Exactly.
fascinating.
Yeah, it is a beautiful test,
Yeah,
and that's a good attitude too, of
yeah,
like trying to appreciate it.
yeah.
So I often have my students go through an exercise, like a why exercise, of
Hmm.
both for the GMAT and for the big picture, like the
Yeah,
MBA itself.
yeah,
So what are all the skills I'm going to learn that
yeah,
are actually maybe
yeah,
apply to real
exactly.
life,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
like, time management, decision making, but then the
yeah,
mathematical skills and the
yeah.
critical
Hmm.
reasoning. So there's that level, and then there's like the big picture why of like, okay, what's my mission?
Hmm.
What do I want to do with this?
Yeah.
Um, so could you speak a little bit more about the why, or on that topic, other
Hmm.
things you maybe gained? I know you talked some on that, but
Yeah.
also with some of the more of the why and lessons
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know what? I think for me, when I was interested, is because a lot of the work I was doing, supporting some of these, community health initiatives, they're doing great work on the ground, right, with the social determinants of health and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I was inspired to get more into the consulting side, because a lot of my role is really working with these student initiatives, helping them with strategy, management, organization, marketing, like everything, like finances. So we're working with these. Multiple organizations, really, as a consultant, and I was really inspired for that perspective, and really getting into management consulting more for the nonprofit sector in a similar field. And that's kind of where I'm thinking of right now in terms of where I'm headed. But I think that was kind of the why that kept me going. I think one thing I wanted to add was that I remember when I was like studying, I was like, you know what kept me going was this fact that I need to be, because a lot of these top schools, everyone has like a solid GMAT score. And if I didn't really work hard enough to get like at least a decent score, I knew that I wouldn't be able to like even match the needs of the program, right? Like, let's say I had like a low quant score, like I know all these top universities, they need somebody who can meet the minimum requirement, and that minimum requirement is sometimes that GMAT score, right? Because they're kind of filtering you out in a way where it's like, if you can't meet that score, that means you're probably not ready for the program. So that's kind of what kept me going. Like, no, I need to be at least on par with my peers. I don't want to, be
Right,
super
right.
low. Like, so I think that's kind of what helped me as well. Was
That's
really
good.
that component. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a fine line there with the not just like a nuance there with
Yeah.
competition. That
Yeah.
competition, we can use it to fuel us.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here in Seattle, and we have Pete
Yeah.
Carroll, and I think his book, like, I think it's called Always Compete. I took his
Hmm.
course. This
Yeah.
idea of like always compete. But
Yeah.
then it goes into like, what's the definition of compete? And it's not
Yeah.
about comparison with others, even
Hmm.
though, I
Yep.
mean, the reality is in this test, it
Yeah.
it is. I mean, it does.
Yeah.
You are ranked. It is a
Yeah.
percentile, so there
Yeah.
is a competition there. But like, not thinking of it so much. I mean, you can use that as fuel
Yep.
potentially, but you don't want to like go too much into like, oh, they got the score quickly, like you said, and I
Yeah.
don't, like, right. You want to use it
Yeah.
as positive fuel,
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
negative fuel.
Yeah.
And then like this other definition of like always compete is like becoming like you said, my best. It's my
Yeah.
best. It's not about
Exactly.
like other people's best. So it's like that is like, right, a lot of times people say I want to be the best, but that's really not necessarily out of your
Yeah. Yeah.
control
Yeah.
on a given day, and
Yeah.
your opponent or whatever, right?
That's one
So
thing I struggle
yeah,
with, especially early
right, right.
on, was like those comparisons. Like, it's like those geniuses that come in, engineering, computer science, or business people. And I'm like, wait, hold on a second. I'm starting at 300s. They're like, some of their baselines, I remember reading online in the forums like GMAT Club or Reddit, it was like 700 baseline. I'm like, what? How do you have a 700 baseline? So I think that comparison, like I early on, I told myself, no, you have to compare. You're only comparing yourself to yesterday, right? So it's like, am I working harder than yesterday? And that's one of the things I learned, is just like focusing more on my own journey, not really avoiding the noise, and like not really worrying like, oh my God, this person got a 790, or this person got, 720, whatever. It's like, now, am I doing better than yesterday? Am I working hard to my best of my ability? And do I
Right.
feel content doing it? And you know what? That
Right.
helped
Right.
me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. So yeah, there were some questions in the chat about order you chose on exam day, and I guess more broadly, like for the actual test, were there things you did like a morning routine beforehand, or other decisions you made? I know you seemed into the wellness, and you strike me as like a pretty mindful person. If there's any mindfulness things that you do, or any other routines that get you in the ideal mindset, because I think we've talked about how important that is.
Yeah, you know what? Scheduling is very important. So one thing that I'd always do is, because I knew I had to focus on studying in the weekends, I would, because I like the idea of, because I'm a morning person, my mind is usually the sharpest in the morning. So I scheduled my test for pretty early, like I think 8:30 or 9. And I would wake up every time I would study and do my practice test, or even just practice in general, like super early, like 7 or 8. And then I would start studying around like 8:30, 9, so around the same time as my GMAT, because that helped my mind kind of get used to it and get comfortable with everything. I know there's a question about caffeine. I love coffee. Like, I'm a coffee addict. I need to have 2 to 3. I think it's a superpower. If you don't like it, you know what? Maybe there's tea or some other things. Exercise, like I said, was essential. I scheduled exercise like 20 minutes. So I would probably study like like on the weekends, for example, I would study maybe 4 hours from 8 to 12, exercise for like an hour or 2 hours, and then study another 2 to 3 hours. Because at least that way I'm refreshed and I can go from there. I would try to do the hardest stuff earlier in the morning. Like, for example, like if I was doing like a mock test or the practice test, and then like the easier content afterwards in the afternoon, just because your body gets tired, mentally tired too. And I think, if for me personally, it'd be a lot harder for me to schedule the hard content, like maybe my weaker areas in the afternoon, because it'd be harder motivation, right? I think managing your motivation levels is also helpful, because like I would just review tests or just do some of the easier things, like maybe easy questions or flashcards in the evening or nighttime, because I'm like, I know like that's easier to do, as opposed to now I need to relearn a whole new concept. Like that's too hard, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind, is like that energy management, and when do
Yeah,
you study the best, the morning or is it the evening?
Totally. Yeah, definitely customizing it for the energy management is a huge factor. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Cool. And so with the TTP course and reviewing and everything, like I have this mantra that I say: review, reflect, redo. And a lot of times people, I feel, aren't doing enough redos. So I'm curious, like, did you take advantage of that much in terms of like, well, I mean, obviously it works. Sometimes I feel like people aren't taking advantage enough of maybe the custom tests or the on-target analytics. There is a lot to get through. So curious, if there are any things, features additional features you found most helpful in terms of review, or any other things related to the course.
Yeah, you know what? Absolutely. The custom bank test was phenomenal. Like, I love doing it because like, one, you can choose and filter based on your weakest areas and questions you've gone wrong. So what I would do like almost every day was like, okay, at least maybe 10 questions here, 20 questions of just like tests, and you can time them as well, of your weakest areas, whether it's sentence correction, um, reading comp or quant, whichever section. And I would just continually do those like consistently through, and you have to, because otherwise there's so much content that you're going to forget. And that's, in my first year of studying, honestly, it was just like a year of like a lot of mistakes. And one thing I didn't do was do flashcards or do the custom tests like on my own. I think you have to take those steps for that score, otherwise it's very difficult for you to retain that information.
Totally. Yeah, the test will, the course will prompt you review tests and things, but I think you do want to go above and beyond that, is my recommendation with the flashcards and the it does prompt you, but I think sometimes people shortcut it,
Yeah, you can't. You know what? I don't know if you
shortcut
can.
it. They want to just do the next task. It's like, don't shortcut that review.
It doesn't help. I did that in my first year, and it didn't help. Like, you have to do the review test, otherwise you're not going to retain the information. And then what I did was, the problem I had was that I would skip certain sections. I would be like, I forget the review test, I'll do it later, and I didn't do it later. And then I wasted more time relearning all the content all over again, as opposed to doing the review. I would have saved so much time.
Right. Yeah. I think that idea of spaced repetition can't be overstated. Of like, it takes a lot of reps, and thinking you're going to get it the first time, like people think, it's just totally not realistic. That's not how our brains work. Like, the idea of the spaced repetition, maybe a lot of people have heard, but it's like, you want to review it quickly after, like maybe the first day, and then, or 5 minutes, 10 minutes after, and then, 10 hours after, and then, and then a day, and then 3 days, and kind of like a curve like that. And then it becomes that fluency where it sticks. So
it actually saves way more time, honestly.
right.
And that's one thing I regretted, was because like
Right.
if you don't do it, you're gonna end up having to relearn the content and spend another like 20 hours, as
Right.
opposed to like maybe if you spent like like 20 minutes each day, like you would have saved so much more time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see, any other questions here? So, day of the test. I know you talked about like your structure, but was there anything additional with like mindset or
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I'm gonna tell you another story. So I was doing the mocks, like I think I was doing like up to 5 mocks, and the fifth, like everything was starting like I think I started like 660, 680, and then I jumped up to 720. I'm like, okay, I'm on track, like, plus 700, which was my goal. And then the fifth mock, I scored a 620.
oh
And
wow.
it was terrible. Like one of the darkest moments of my life. That 3 day period, I was so stressed out. I'm like, oh my God, I spent 2 years of studying almost, and I'm still in the 600s. Like, what have I done? I've wasted so much time. And then I remember just like, like walking around, like seeing some of my friends, and I just felt shame. I'm like deep. I didn't tell anyone. Like even my parents, I'm like, oh my God, my parents, they're gonna be ashamed of me. They finally believing in me, and supporting my career pathway. And then like it was just a very like the anxiety was insane. And then I remember what I did was I just I just went for a walk with a friend because I de-stressed, because it was insane amounts of stress. And he was just telling me, look, there's no way you're going to be able to binge study everything and like get, all the weak areas that you messed up on the test and somehow get a good score. And I'm like, wait, no, you're wrong, dude. There's no, like, I have to binge study. That's the only way I can score 700 plus. I'm going to pull it out if I study like 12 hours a day. And then I realized like a day after of doing that, I'm like, there's no way it's not going to happen. And I just kind of like accepted it. And
Right.
just like from a mental perspective, like, a lot more exercise, calm walks, sometimes listen to meditation. If you're spiritual, or if you're a religious person, that helps too, because you're like, you always give it up to a higher power. I think that can be a useful tool. And I just kind of accepted a shift in my mindset. I'm like, you know what? Forget the score. Even if I score really bad, that's fine. As long as I just focus on trying my best on the day of, focus on my ability, like that growth mindset piece. And you know what? Somehow I scored a 700. And on the day of, like, I didn't feel that much anxiety. I was like, because I kind of just accepted things. I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Whatever. Forget the score. Who cares? I just focus on trying my best and see whatever happens. And that, like, I was pretty calm in the morning. Got there pretty early. Had my coffee, and I think what's key, I think for people, is choosing a good test center. Like, I think that is very underrated, because my first test the year before, it was, let's just say, the test center, like the markers were running out and they're not, no
Oh
one,
wow.
like, it was terrible. I was like, what is going on here? This is ridiculous. Right. And I had to rush to the lady, and I'm putting my hand up because the rules are you have to put your hand up. Right.
Yeah.
The
That's
marker,
extra
and
stress is horrible.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm losing minutes. I'm like, what the heck? And I rush to the table, okay, I need marker. And she's taking her time finding a marker. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So
Yeah,
one
that's
thing,
no bueno.
yeah. Yeah, that's why maybe even like doing like a practice one, like mock, because you can always cancel your score, right? That doing that could be helpful, at least to know which test center works. And the one I chose, amazing people, very supportive, like very positive, and the markers worked. So it was
Yeah,
great.
that's good.
Yeah.
So a few more comments on that. That totally
Yeah.
makes sense, and I have
Yeah.
heard these horror stories more
Yeah.
than I'd like to.
Yeah.
So one option is there is the online one. Of course,
Yeah.
there are stories with that, with internet going
Yeah.
out. I mean, for the most part, works pretty well, but there's issues with that too. Maybe potentially look up reviews. I think you can sometimes find Google reviews for the center, and actually going to the center and looking, you can go, and sometimes people will just go and get comfortable with it. Like I think maybe they don't want you poking around too much, but there's, but you can go look at it. And just get, and then also online, there's like a little video that just kind of shows you, if you don't want to go to it, that just like just kind of what it looks like. And so
and the inside,
that helps.
yeah.
The inside, what it looks like. You do want to
And
give
there's
yourself.
reviews.
I got a little story too. My first GMAT,
Yeah.
I was going for the perfection because I wanted to be a GMAT tutor. So I was like, oh, I'll get my 800. That'll be cool. But it was too much pressure on myself. But I was prepped well enough that it ended up okay. But anyway, I took come back from my break, and I thought like you had an extra minute. I don't know why I thought this, but like I thought the extra minute of like instruction screens would like just give me that extra minute, but it doesn't work that way. It's like
Oh,
you have to
yeah,
get back first, and I'm like
yeah,
chewing my carrots. I'm like, damn carrots,
yeah,
like
yeah,
because they like take too long to chew, and
yeah,
the check in right can take like 2 minutes to get
yeah,
through, and then I'm like
yeah,
late a minute, 2 minutes late, and then
yeah,
it can snowball. But
yeah.
that's where the mindfulness can come in of like,
Hmm.
okay, 2 minutes, I'll be fine. You deep
Yeah,
breaths and all that.
yeah,
But anyway, do your best to prevent those things. And
yeah,
then if they do happen, like that mindfulness can
yeah,
really help a lot. Do you have some sort of mindfulness practice? I know you said
yeah,
spiritual, but
yeah,
also in
yeah,
terms of mindfulness, breathing,
yeah.
anything on that sort? Or
Yeah, absolutely. There's like a lot of mindfulness videos I would listen to, even like 3 minute mindfulness, just focusing on the breath. Like for
that's
me,
really
like
good.
I think that can help too. But like for me, I know my mind is all over the place. So like even if I don't focus on the breath, like I just sitting quietly, closing my eyes, and like having like a clearing like the stress and the buildup of energy. It can even
Right.
help kind of reorganize your thoughts. 'Cause sometimes with stress, you can't really think of what to do next. So that helps as well. I know I used to do that, especially after work, because I had so much. I'm working long, like 14-hour days sometimes,
Yeah.
and then just clearing the mind before I study, that was helpful. Prayer is also helpful for me, because sometimes when you leave it up to the higher power, it's just like it is what it is. Like if you're someone who's spiritual, that can be helpful too. But yeah, doing that, especially when you have a lot on your mind. I know there's a question about like, how do you manage like the workload and stuff, like
Hmm.
adding exercise maybe right after work, or like some sort of mindful practice, like going for a quiet walk, no music, no like phone, nothing, just by yourself enjoying nature, and then resetting. Like, you need something to reset. I think that was very helpful. Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah,
That's great. And you might have said earlier, I think you gave your schedule like mornings,
yeah,
especially on weekends. And then
mhm,
about how much were you studying on weekdays? Because it sounds like, right,
yeah,
if you have a 14-hour day, that's really
yeah,
tough.
yeah,
And there
yeah,
was a
yeah,
question about that.
yeah, yeah,
But can we
yeah,
review in terms of how you manage
for
that in
sure.
terms
Yeah,
of weekdays and
yeah,
like not, I think at one point you were saying you were trying to do too much and that can be a
yeah,
challenge. But then I think
yeah,
finding the right balance of what's sustainable, right, and
mhm,
realistic, and then being able to follow through with it
yeah.
is really important. Yeah.
You know what? That's essential. And I always had the problem of quantity over quality. So I'd be doing ridiculous hours. Okay, like on the weekday, I gotta study 5 hours for sure, and then I would only end up studying 1 hour. Because like I had so many other things going on, and then I'd get depressed. I'm like, oh, I'm not meeting my goals, and it negatively affect my mindset. But I think towards like the latter half of my GMAT prep, when I was getting consistent, I aimed to do at least 3 hours per day. So what I would do is I would come in super early to work, like an hour and a half early. I'd get like an hour in, maybe do some practice questions, like the hard stuff, right? Getting it out of the way in the morning, and then and I'd do at least 2 hours after work, and then I would go home. And then when I go home, I could just focus on other things like chores or just relaxing. So I try to
Right.
aim for like 3 hours of just quality work. I think that's better than aiming for like some unreasonable amount. And that's the problem I had, was even on the weekends, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna study 8 hours today so I can do my, get a high score within 2 months. But you know what? The quality is always better than quantity, because you're gonna remember the stuff easier, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So there's a question way back at the start
Mhm.
about strategy for CR questions. We haven't dove
Yeah.
into like the technical
Yeah.
stuff, but
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
have any
Yeah.
insights of like things that you found most helpful, either through
Yeah.
your course or
Yeah.
just your own skill set. I know you started higher on verbal,
Yeah.
either with the CR or
Yeah.
just other things that highlights that you found
Yeah.
like your most helpful habits or tech strategies to prevent errors,
Yeah.
either in quant or verbal, whatever comes to
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, you know what? I think in terms of verbal CR, like there's certain like underlying principles, right? That TTP actually does a very good job. And if you kind of know the principles, like you
Right.
can pretty much get almost a perfect score, at least in the CR section. Like for
Right.
example, the author assumes X for every argument. The author assumes no malicious variables. Those are in
Yeah.
TTP. You'll
Right.
understand it. But there's like
Right.
underlying principles almost for like it applies to almost every single CR question, because there's an argument, and it's almost like, is it a causation argument, right?
Exactly.
And a lot
Exactly.
of times it is causation, and then
Right.
and you're just trying to figure out, wait, is this author saying this X is the cause, or is it the Y is the cause? And it's just, once you understand the underlying principles, everything else comes into play. Like, okay, you can easily strengthen and weaken the argument. You can inferences are very easy too. You can apply the argument in different ways. So I think those underlying principles, understanding that, and the way the argument's structured is also helpful. That helped me. It's like, okay, this for sure is the premise. Now this is the argument component, and then this is the conclusion, right? So understanding how that fits in is very helpful, because the thing with CR is that it's essentially reading comp, applies directly into CR. So it's like a larger version of CR. And if you can really figure out CR, like reading comp gets so much easier, in my opinion, at least.
Totally
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's great point. I think that's a great breakdown of it,
Yeah.
of like the course. I mean, if you're breaking it down, like a lot of times people maybe have a natural gift for it, and like right,
Yeah.
and they can answer
Yeah.
them, right? But
Yeah.
the course breaks down like all these principles, right?
Yeah.
So and it becomes more mathematical, where like, okay, I see this word like X is can be attributed to Y. That's causation. So we're looking for an alternate cause, just like you said.
Yeah.
And we see, this word signals. So you can be more mathematical about it. And were there any things on reading comp? I have a special place in my heart for that, because I helped write that.
Did you?
Years ago, the reading
Oh,
comp.
that's amazing. You know what? I love reading comp. They just did it so well. They actually broke it down structure by structure, almost word by word. I think even there's a certain way you have to read reading comp, and you can't read it like how we usually read other articles and stuff. Like, you have to pay attention to each word, the role of each sentence, and then how it fits into that main paragraph, and then how that paragraph fits into the whole, essay. And what each paragraph does is the first paragraph just introducing the topic. It's a second arguing against the first, like, and then keeping in mind the different authors' perspectives is key. So honestly,
totally.
I love that reading comp. It was amazing. Like, anytime I was doing poorly, I'm like, wait, hold on a second, I'm missing some fundamentals. Let's go back, re-review the different sections. Like, what are the transition words? How do they affect the part of the argument, right? So, and the role of the sentence too. It's a very structured way, and I think you can get like a perfect score on reading comp if you just understand the structure of it. It's all about the structure, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, totally. Great points. Yeah, and that's what when I was writing it, was really trying to highlight that more mathematical nature of structural clues, like the contrast markers. I actually found this clue, early on in my prep, 2016, 2017, of like, notice the word however. That's like a red light. And so, and then it goes on from that, and like, the word this means I should look above, and the word additionally means it's another point. And for example, we're supporting something above, and it goes on and on. But there's all these marker words of like, and then extreme markers. We got the word all versus like some, right? And there's all these kind of words that you can be more concrete about and exact. That's
and it helps understand the passage entirely. Like, you fully get the passage. Like, okay, the author first says this, but then actually he argues against that same point by bringing up point Y, and then he concludes by finding a resolution somewhere in the middle, right? So
Cool. So it looks like we got like 8 minutes left. If anyone else has more questions, fire away in the chat. And then I guess, do you have any other advice for people, general advice? I mean, we covered a lot, I think, in terms of, psychology and using the resource, making the most of the resources, review. But any other advice you have for everyone?
I think there's a question before I get into that. I think there's a question about order of exam. I think for me personally, I chose verbal because, I chose quant first and then verbal, and then I did the easy stuff because I knew like quant was the hardest, and I need to use like 100% of my mental like energy at the beginning, right? And then I knew that verbal, I'm not as worried as much about verbal as I am quant, so I used it in the second, like when I had a bit less energy. And then the easiest stuff for me was AWA and the integrated reasoning, because it's not. I mean, it doesn't really apply to your GMAT score. Of course, it can make you stand out compared to other partners. But you know what also was very helpful? The AWA template that came out, amazing. I scored 6.0. So
nice.
I think that's it goes from 1 to 6, right? So they gave you an amazing template. So that was actually very fantastic. But yeah, and I think in terms of overall advice, one thing I really kept in mind, and this is like a mantra I kept repeating, was nothing is hard. There's no such thing as a hard question. Because I know that like in GMAT, they're like even the GMAT Club or TTP, like we use terminology to like differentiate. I guess you have to use categories for easy or medium hard, but I never allowed that to affect my mindset where it's like, this is a hard question. No, what I used to believe instead, I forced myself to believe that nothing in life is hard. Some tasks require more time, right, and energy. That's okay. As long, because sometimes when it's hard, it's almost like this concrete, abstract thing that you can never get over. And then it's almost like a crutch they use. At least that's what I used. So I always like push myself. No, it's not a hard question. Easy question. Let's give it a bit more time and tackle at it from like a fun way. Like, how do we make this enjoyable? That
Right.
helped me get through a lot of the difficult questions. Yeah.
Right. And I like that what you just said too about how do I make this
Yeah.
enjoyable? Did that apply in other
Yeah.
ways? In terms of
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
I think like for me, like I really like, especially the tests. I found the tests the most enjoyable. Like it's almost like a challenge. I'm like, this damn test is coming at me. Like, let's go, bro. We're going for a fight,
Let's go.
right? And,
I love it. I love
like
it. I love
the
it. I
practice
love it.
test too. I'm like, let's go. You know, what do you think you can do against me, right? I mean, it can be like I'm a bit combative in that sense, so it
Yeah,
helps
it's
kind of
great. I
motivate me.
love it. I
If
love
it
it.
helps you, it's like, yo, let's go for it, right? Let's go
Yeah.
for a fight. I think that helped me for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that reminds me of this this other tutor. Actually,
Yeah.
he talked about getting into an alter ego. He was really into
Yeah.
psychological things, and
Yeah.
there's this really cool book. And if you look up alter ego effect and find some podcasts on it,
Yeah.
I think he might have been on Finding Mastery, which is an amazing podcast
Yeah.
as well. But this idea of like channeling, like the competitor you were talking about, like that. Let's battle. He would actually channel like American Sniper, like that idea of precision.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do necessarily a character, but I
Yeah.
kind of like took from that. Like I'd say I'm sharp, focused, precise. I'm sharp, focused, precise, and like make precision my number one mantra, because really, like it also reminds me of how we talked about how like a lot of the skills carry over, and you were talking about how reading comp and critical reasoning connect. They also, if you improve those skills, that's going to help you on your quant. Your quant, because the reading, like there's a lot of errors that can happen because of reading errors. So really, like channeling that precision I think is a key one.
Yeah.
Did you have any mantras yourself that you were like really trying to remind yourself, or just cues like, oh, you said that one and nothing is hard. Were there any other like ones that applied, or even specific question types like, oh, I'm going to read, for me, I like to read the stem first on CR, which actually the course says otherwise, but I have my own things I like to do,
Yeah,
So,
you know what? There's another one. I think it's great with TCP. They always have a quote. Every time you open the launch board, there's always like an interesting quote that kind of motivates you. There's one called, if you're going through hell, keep going, right?
Oh, I love that.
I use that at the darkest moments when I'm like, oh my God, I'm making so many mistakes, but no, just gotta keep going. That was very helpful. The other thing I remember, I think you made a very good point about like the precision. And I have terrible handwriting, right? So for me, a lot of the times my mistakes, or because I just messed up the number, or when I was like, for example, if I took over the number from the addition and then I'm using it for some other calculation or putting it into a formula, like I messed up the number. So like I made so many easy mistakes that were just based on like clean writing, focus on the position, making sure your notes or the way you even solve or it's organized so you don't mess up and you don't make easy mistakes. I think that's very helpful too, like that precision piece. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's a good stopping point, unless any questions come in last minute here. But yeah, thanks so much, Abdul. Really appreciate your time, and huge congrats. And I know you're gonna make the most of this opportunity, and can't wait to hear what comes next. Do you have any last words? I know
you know what, for those people that are like start super low with the super low baseline, don't give up. You know what? I think it'll be worth it. It may take longer than you expect, and it may be a bit more challenging, but I absolutely like that joy you'll get once you finish the exam. I remember that ride home was just beautiful. It will absolutely be worth it. Believe in yourself, and you will get the score you want. There's no way if you put in the work you won't get the score. Like I said, nothing is hard. It just requires more time.
That's awesome. So inspiring, and so many great takeaways. So just a reminder, please put your top takeaway into the comments below right when we get off the stream. That'll help you synthesize what you learned, also help everyone else. Please like and subscribe. And thanks so much for joining. And thanks again, Abdul. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.